First test will be on Monday. It will be open book, but no laptops, no cell phones. Okay, and if I find two students collaborating via piece of paper the old-fashioned way, then both will get in trouble. Okay, so make sure you can bring as many papers as you feel like it. The format will be simple, short questions. So for example, I may give you some partial code, ask you to complete the code, or I may ask you to write a small segment of code, usually not more than 7-8 lines of code. So try to go through all the lectures, make sure you understand all the concepts. And the material will be including today's lecture. So today I'll cover a few important things. There'll be definitely some questions. There will definitely be some questions on writing database code, so make sure you feel comfortable with it. Okay, and of course indexers. Today I will cover generics, so try to pay good attention. Okay, interfaces. Okay, lists. Array lists is as operators. Okay, general inheritance. Make sure you understand all of the keywords that we had discussed. For example, override, abstract, virtual. When do you apply which keyword, right? Okay, so try to prepare nicely, and rather than printing every lecture, every handout, my suggestion would be, just bring 2-3 pages of some code that you feel difficult writing. But if you print out everything, you won't have enough time to go take a look at, oh, how did I do this, and then write the answer. Okay? So create a summary for whatever code that you need to remind yourself of. Okay? Okay, so now today I'll cover a few important topics. First one is, oops, I misspelled it, displaying multiple forms. Okay, so as we discussed last time, we can easily create menus. Menus behave like buttons, right? Through one of the menus, we can display more than one form. Each form has a class associated with it, right? So once we display forms, either we show them in modal manner or modeless manner. So what's the difference between the two? Modal form, and sometimes people call it dialogue. Dialogue is another word for form. Okay, requires complete attention from the user. Okay, meaning either you submit the form or you close the form. Okay, the application cannot continue until this form disappears. Okay, the application cannot continue until the form disappears. Okay, on the other hand, modeless. Form can coexist with other forms. Okay, so you can click on the main form, do something on it, click on the modeless form, do something on it, right? Okay, so to give you a very quick example of a modal modeless, okay, suppose I launch Word. Okay, once I launch Word, right? Suppose I go File, Open. Okay, so you'll see this is like a form that pops up, right? There's a list box over here. There are some buttons over here, right? Okay, so once this form appears, if I try to go to click on anywhere, you'll see it won't let me do anything. So this form has the complete attention, right? So if I click, nothing can be done until either I pick a file or I close this. Once I close this, then I can go select something from the menu, type something, right? Okay, so File Open dialog is an example of a modal form, okay? To give you an example of a modeless form, suppose I go, let me go back. Okay, suppose I try to search for something. So if I hit Control F, okay, so see over here, there's another form that pops up, right? Now I can type something over there. I can go to the main form, keep typing, right? So both of them are coexisting. So this search dialog is an example of a modeless dialog, okay? So how do we create modal or modeless dialogues of ourselves? Okay, pretty easy. In both cases, we will add it to our application like a new form, okay? But when we try to display it, a modal form is displayed as displayed using show dialog call. Okay, a modeless form is displayed using show call. So let me go and create one small example and show you how easy it is to create modal and modeless. Okay, so if I go to Visual Studio, okay, if I create a new project, and then if I pick Visual C#, Windows Forms application, from the drop down I go to Fall 2015 folder and write modal, modeless. So I'll give you a quick example of modal and modeless. Okay. Anyway, Windows Forms application, Visual C#. So once I click OK. Okay, now suppose you were trying to create a database-driven application and you wanted to add a new student to the database, right? So remember, and let's pretend a student has 5 fields, first name, last name, ID, test 1, test 2, right? So you wanted the user to be able to type the 5 pieces of information through a form, right? So in that case, what we'll do is right-click on the project. We will say Add New Item. Okay, so now I'll pick a Windows form so that through this form we can specify creating a new student. So if I pick a Windows form, and let's call it form new student. So you can give it some meaningful name, right? So I picked a Windows form to be added to the project. So now I have 2 forms, right? So first let me design the second form. So form new student. So here the idea is to have 5 text boxes. So if I go to the toolbox, through all Windows forms, I'll locate a text box. These are alphabetical. So I'll pick a text box. If I double click on it, it will draw it. Let me move it somewhere over here. Then if I go over here, pick a label. Okay, draw it over here, right? And since I need 5 pieces of information, okay, by holding the control key, let me select both the text box as well as the label. Okay, so once both are selected, I'll just right click on one of these and copy, and then paste it 4 times. So paste, move it here, paste, move it here, paste, and one more paste. Right? So now let's give them some meaningful names to the text boxes. So if I select the first text box and click on alphabetical, go to the name property. So first one will be named TXT first name. Remember, the convention is when you are creating a user interface, if it's a text box, you'll start it with a 3-letter prefix TXT. If it's a button, 3-letter prefix BTN, and followed by some meaningful name, right? So then if I select the second one, okay, through this I'll be collecting TXT last name. Select the third one, TXT ID. Select the fourth one, TXT test 1, and fifth one, TXT test 2, right? And then labels, you don't have to give them any name because they are simply to help the user find out what this text box is for. So I'll select the label, and rather than giving it a name property, I'll just give it a text property. Okay, so for the first label, I'll say first space name. For the second label, last name. For the third label, ID. For the fourth label, test 1. For the fifth label, test 2, right? Okay, and now let me go to the toolbox, double click on a button. So I'll put one button for submitting and one more button if the user decide to cancel. Okay, so one button for submitting. So left button, I will give it a name of BTN cancel. The right button, I will give it a name of BTN submit or create student, right? So then left button will have a text property of cancel, and the right button will have a text property of, let's say, create student. Okay, if the create student doesn't fit on it, then you can always make it wider. Okay, so you can easily put colors to your UI, user interface. For example, by selecting a button, you'll see there's a very simple property called back color. So if you go, there are 3 choices: custom, web, system. So for example, if you wanted to give a light green color, you can simply specify. If you wanted to change the text color is called the four-color property. So if I go to four color, okay, so that's the text color. So again, if I wanted it to be red, for example, so anyway, easy to color anything, right? Once you're satisfied, okay, let me move this a little bit to the left. Once you're satisfied with the form, right? So now the idea is like this: through one of the menus, we will pop up this form. The user will type the 5 fields. So now we want to collect 5 pieces of information from this form, okay? So remember, in good object-oriented programming, rather than creating 5 separate variables and passing those 5 separate variables to the main form, we always encapsulate it as a class object. So it would be nice if we can create one class with 5 fields, and then this form will simply read the data from the text boxes, populate the class object, and submit it to the main form. Okay? So let's create a class corresponding to these 5 fields. So if I right-click on the project, say Add Class. Okay, so now let me give it a name of Student. Okay, so we already had created student class before. Normally, this is what we do. We will say, for example, string first name, right? Then I will right-click it through quick actions, refactor, right? And encapsulate field, and it will end up writing the get set for it, right? Okay, alternatively, just for testing purposes, if you're developing professional code, this is what you will do. But just for quick testing, what you can do is you can just create the public property. So you can say public string. Remember, public properties in C# start uppercase, right? And then substitute get and just say get and set. So for quick development, you can do this, but professionally you should still write the proper getter and setter. So to save time, let me just do it the short way. So I'll paste it, paste it, paste it, paste it, and change the values and the data types. This will be the last name. This will be int and ID. Once again, since I'm writing only the public fields, I'll start it with uppercase, okay? Then test1, and integer, correct? And then int test2, right? So once we have created a class encapsulating those 5 fields that we want to collect from the form, now let's go back to the form new student, okay? So once we are in this form, okay, so once again, the purpose is, once it appears, the user will type some data, and as soon as they click on create student, we will read the 5 text boxes and populate the student class object, right? So how do we do that? What's the best way to do that? I'll right click on name of the form new student, go to view code, okay, and over here I will expose a property. So inside this form, I will expose a public property, which will be a read-only property. Okay, so public student, you can call it anything you feel like it. So you can call it, for example, get student. Okay, and okay, okay, so then you will have get public student, let me call it student info. Okay, so in the get part, I will create one object of the student class, student S1 equal to new student. Okay, then one by one I'll populate the fields. So S1 dot first name, okay, will be whatever was typed in the first text box. Okay, so which is txt first name dot text. And how do we read the data typed from in a text box? By simply using the dot text property, right? Very similarly, s1 dot last name equal to txt last name dot text. s1 dot id equal to txt id dot text. Okay, so now there's a small problem. Okay, anytime we read the data from a text box, it's always read as a string, right? But ID was declared as an integer. So how do we convert a string to an integer? Okay, in C#, very similar to Java. In Java, you will do integer.parse, okay, with a capital I. In C#, you can just specify the name of the data type you wanted to convert to and just write the parse. So if I do in.parse, it will convert this string to an integer. If I wanted to convert it to a double, what will I say? Double.parse. Okay, so it's very easy, right? So then s1 dot test1 equal to txt test1 dot text. Do I have to convert it to an integer?
Yes.
Yes, right? So I'll do in dot parse. And lastly, s1 dot test2 equal to in dot parse txt test2 dot text. Okay, so once we have populated created a student, read the data from the 5 text boxes, populated the student fields, we'll simply say return s1. Okay. So now we have created a property inside our form new student called student info. Okay, it's a read-only property because we are only providing the get part. So after somebody displays the form, they can, by the name of the form object, whatever form object they used, all they have to do is say .studentinfo and they'll be able to get whatever was typed by the user, right? Okay, so now lastly, since this will be displayed in a modal manner, okay, let me show you that part. Okay, so let me go to the main form. Main form is form 1 in our example. And if I go to the main form and go to the toolbox, and first I will create a menu strip. So menu strip. Okay, then suppose I put up file, I put exit, and then I create a top level menu called student and create new student, right? So anyway, so let me go to the exit, give it a name of menu file exit. Go to the student, create new student. Let me give it just the name of menu create new student. Okay. So once I've given them meaningful name, now let me double click on this so that I can write an event handler for this. Okay. And once I write it, now what's our goal? If somebody clicks on it, we want to show that form for the new student in a modal manner. Okay. So show create student form in a modal manner. Right? So how do we do that? First thing is you have to create an object of whatever form class we created, but we called it form new student, right? See, if I right click on this and view code, you'll see with every form there's a class associated with it. Form new student, for example, right? So if I go back to the form, double click on create new student again, okay? So first I will create one object of form new student. So whatever fns equal to new form new student, right? So this will create the form in the memory of the computer. Now we want to display it in a modal manner. Okay, as I mentioned, the way we display it is by calling, do you see there are two options over here? Show and show dialog. Okay, if we wanted to display it in a modeless manner, we'll call show. If we wanted to display in a modal manner, we'll call show dialog. So we wanted to display it in a modal manner, so we'll say show dialog, right? And first, let me just do this. Let me not put it inside the if statement. And run this program. I'll run it through the debugger so that I can easily stop it. Debug, start debugging. Okay, incorrect accessibility. Anytime you get this type of error, we have the public-private issue. So let's go to student class and make it public. Okay, let me run it again. Okay, so now take a look over here. As soon as I click over here, this shows up, right? And how will I know whether it's modal or modulus? If I try to go back, click on any menu, does it let me do it? No. So it's displaying it in a modal manner, right? Only time I can go back is either somebody clicks this button or this button, right? So if the user types something, right? Suppose I wanted to create a student, bill, and so on. So after typing these, if I click on create student, that will be one way to send the information back to the main form, right? Or what will be the other way? If I cancel, then no information should be sent back to the main form, right? In both cases, the form will disappear. So the question is, how will the main form know whether cancel button was clicked or whether create student button was clicked, okay? So the way we do it is, anytime we display it in a modal manner, it's the responsibility of this form to return a different result to the main form, to the calling form, if this button is clicked, and return a different result if cancel is clicked, right? So we as a programmer, how do we do that? Let me show you how easy it is. Okay, so I'll go to the form new student. Okay, no need for me to write any code in the click event of any of these buttons, okay? So I simply will select it. I'm not double clicking on it. I'm simply selecting the button. And if you take a look over here, one of the properties of the button inside the form is called the dialog result. Dialog result. Okay, what's the default value of it?
None.
None. If I drop it down, there are 7 options I have, right? So you can pick whatever option you feel like it. Typically, for the cancel button, obviously we'll pick the cancel return, right? For the normal submission, most of the time people pick OK, but you can also pick yes if you wanted to. Okay. So because we wanted to submit the data, if this button is clicked, I'll say yes. Oh, sorry, let me say OK. For this button, I'll set the dialog result to cancel, right? Okay, so that means in the calling form, we will examine the dialog result property of this new student form. If it is okay, what does that mean? Somebody actually submitted the data to us. If they click cancel, that means we can ignore it, right? So now if I go to the main form, right click on main form view code, right? So now let me put that if statement and see if that makes sense. So I will say if fns.showDialog. Okay, so because showDialog is modal, our code will be stuck over here until the user closes the dialog. Okay, and remember the user will close it up under 2 conditions. They hit the cancel or they hit the create new student button. So if I say equal to, put a space bar, it's Visual Studio is pretty helpful. it automatically tells us the reply that we will get from showing will be a dialog result, and it will be an enumeration. Okay, that's the symbol for an enumeration. So you don't have to memorize anything. You simply double click and then say dot, and you have all the 7 options. So remember, we had picked OK if somebody is trying to submit the form, right? So if we get back a result of OK, what does that mean? Somebody actually typed the data, right? So now let's collect the student information typed in the form. And how will we know what information was typed? Remember, we created one property in the form new student. Let me take you there now. So form new student, if I right click, view code, see, we did not write any code in this form. And the only code we wrote over here was a public property called student info, so that if somebody calls it, we can read the data from the text boxes and let the person know that this is the data that was entered by the user, right? So all we have to do is just examine this property from this form. So let me go to the main form now. So in the, if the dialog was closed because somebody clicked on the create new student button, so our student st equal to, okay, what's the name of the form new student object? FNS. So all I have to do is say FNS dot student info, correct? So if you type st u, there's a property available. So this is how, so now we will get all the fields that the user had typed. Okay, now we can write the information to the database. Right? And just to show you, let me put a breakpoint over here. So remember, breakpoint we put by going to this gray area and just clicking. Okay? Once it changes to a red dot, and now if I run it through the debugger, start debugging. Okay. And if I click on create new student, now if I go, let's say type Bill Baker 1, 2, 3, 4, 85, 91, and if I click on create student, okay, we'll stop at the breakpoint in the main form. Okay, so this is where it stopped, right? And if I put my mouse on ST and expand it, do you see it gave me all the information, right? So I was able to collect the information, okay? So anyway, to summarize, okay, if you are trying to create modal forms so that you can collect information from the user, what's the typical procedure? Okay, create a new form. Okay, design the UI like we did. Okay, whatever text boxes, whatever you needed, correct? Okay, once you have designed the UI, and then expose a property for the information you wanted to collect from the user. Okay, and then for the buttons in the modal form, okay, set the dialog result to OK and so whatever. So this is the typical procedure. that you will follow. If you wanted to create a modal form so that the user can display it from a menu and then collect the information, right? Straightforward, okay? Okay, the second case is extremely easy, the modeless case. All we have to do is call the show method and make it appear on the screen. Okay, while I'm on the topic of the forms, okay, let me go to this form and add a drop down over here. Okay, so if I go to the toolbox, okay, you'll see there's a couple of options. There's a list box. Is there a combo box? There's a combo box. Okay, the difference is, let me quickly put the list box over there. Okay, so the list box will always show up, and you can put some different options in it. For example, okay, so let me go to the toolbox, double click on a label. Okay, and suppose I give it a text property of, let's say, housing preference. Okay. Okay, and so now let's pretend we'll give a single room, double, or apartment, or whatever as the three options. Okay. So once you click over here, right, you will see there's a collection called items. Okay, so like an array list, a collection, every collection has an add method, remove method, right? So if you wanted to pre-populate it using code, you could do that. So let me go right-click on Form New Student, View Code. Okay, so as soon as this form is displayed, if you wanted to populate that list box with a few options, then best place to do that is in the constructor. But in the constructor after the initialize component, because if you write the code before to populate the list box will not be created. So this initialize component basically creates all the buttons and text boxes and so on. So right after this, for example, did I give that list box a name? No. So let me give it some name of, okay, let me call it LSD housing. Okay. So now if I right click on view code, okay, so if I say LSD housing dot, okay, remember we don't add something directly to the list box. List box contains a collection called items, and we add something to a collection. So if I say dot items, dot add, let's say double room, okay, and LSD housing dot items dot add, let's say single, and LSD housing dot items dot add, let's say apartment. Okay. So anyway, suppose these are the three options, right? So in the constructor for the form new student, after the initialize component, we added 3 things to the list box. Okay? So always keep in mind whenever we add something to a list box, we add it to a collection that it contains called items. Okay? So anyway, if I run it, as soon as I show this, now you see there are 3 things showing up, right? So the user can select anything and submit the data over here. Okay? So next thing we need to know is how do we know what item was selected by the user, right? So to quickly show you that, first let me go and modify the student class because now we'll be collecting one more piece of information about housing preference. Okay, so let's go to form new student. Sorry, where's the student? And let me add public string housing preference. Get set. Okay. And now if I go back to form new student. Okay, so the new information that we need to expose through this is now what was selected by the user for the housing preference, right? So I will say s1.housing preference equal to. So now the question is, how do we read the data from a list box? Okay. So name of the list box, LST housing dot, you will see there's a couple of options. There's a selected item, selected value, right? So if I do selected item, let me see, will that work? Selected item returns an object, so let me do a toString. Okay. So anyway, now if I go to the main form, okay, the breakpoint is still there, so if I run it, click over here, suppose I pick, okay, I'm only interested in saying, so if I click on create student,
number.
Integer.
what happened?
Integer.
Oh, okay. I forgot about that, right? So that's why it's, okay, let me close the form. Debug, stop debugging. Okay, start debugging. Okay, so new student. Okay, this one doesn't matter. This one, let's say, okay, create student.
So not selected.
Oh. All right. Debug, stop debugging. Start debugging. Create new student. Okay, this one. Okay, so let's suppose I pick this one, create student, right? Now if I go and click on ST, move the mouse on ST, so you can see it was able to correctly determine, right? Okay, now it's always a good practice, as you saw, if I forgot to select it, it created an error. You can always set some default, right? So for example, how do we set the default? So if I stop debugging, let me go back to form new student, new code. Okay, again in the constructor I can say LST, after I've added all the items, dot selected index equal to 0. So whatever is the first item, that will be selected by default. So if I click, so you'll see it already has highlighted, so even if somebody forgets, right? Okay, the second option is we put a drop down. So anytime there's a fixed set of options, like I said, you can do a list box or you can do a drop down. The advantage of a drop down is it occupies less space on the form. So a lot of times we prefer the drop down as opposed to the list box. But the code is pretty much the same. Both of them have an items collection to which we add something. So very quickly to show you, if I go to the list box, oh sorry, I want a combo box. The drop down is called combo box. So suppose I copy this, paste it over here. Okay, and suppose this, let me put status, meaning junior, senior, whatever, graduate, student, right? So let me call this, give it this a name of CMB status. Okay, so now if I write, first let me add one more field to the student class. So now we will be getting, okay, now the status, let's pretend will be a fixed set of choices, right? It could be freshman, junior, senior, sophomore, graduate, okay, 5 choices. Anytime you have a fixed set of choices, it's always a good practice to create an enumeration, right? So as I showed you in the last part, so let me right click, add new item, and let me pick a class. Remember I mentioned that there's no enumeration directly, but you can always pick a class and delete the code for the class and type in enumeration. So if I say, let's say my notes. Okay, and now if I go over here and say, oops, I need to change the class to an enum. Student status. Student status. Okay. And okay, so once we have typed that, right? So now if we go to the student class, okay, so now we will make it an enumeration. So the enumeration was called student status. And let's give it a name of status. Or let me call it S status. Get set, right? Okay, so that's the extra field we added in the student class so that we can obtain the status as an enumeration, right? So now if I go to the drop down, okay, so let me go to the form new student, right click, view code, right? Okay, so, okay, so name of the, did I give the name of the combo box? CMB status, right? So if I go view code, so I will do CMB status dot. Let me see if I'll try one thing. I haven't tried it before. See if that works. Data source equal to student status. Does it let me do that? No, it won't let me do that. So I have to do it individually. So dot and so that's the only option we
Professor, can we use for loop here for adding?
Yeah. Probably can. Let me see. Brute force way would be we simply go and say, for example, freshman, right? And one second. I remember something new. Something less item or something. Okay, anyway, for right now, there's a better way to do it. I'll try to remember it and give you the information next time. So the brute force way, of course, will be to type one at a time, freshman, and Control C. Control V. Sophomore and junior and so on, right? So let me just leave it at 3, right? So now when somebody makes a selection over here, we can put a switch statement over here. So we can say string selected status equal to cmb status dot text. So how do we read the data from a combo box? Simply whatever is selected will appear, so exactly like a text box. Okay? And now we can write a switch statement. For example, switch selected status, and case, for example, let me make it 2 upper, so that we don't make a uppercase lowercase comparison mistake. So if we say freshman, then S1 dot S status equal to, and now through the enumeration, we can just pick the freshman. Okay, and then break. Okay, and very similarly, if I copy and paste this, Control C, Control V, if it is sophomore, then it will be dot sophomore, okay, because of our properties of type enumeration. Okay. Okay, and so same way for the other cases, so hopefully you get the idea.
Break statement.
Open up the break. Okay, so anyway, so now if I run it one time, okay, so same thing, I need to create the enumeration as public as well. So if I go to my nums, make it public. Okay, and if I run it, okay, so anyway, let me do a quick test. See, from the drop down, for example, now somebody can pick sophomore, right? And if I submit, once it comes over here, if I drop it down, and since I had selected sophomore, you can see the status is coming back as sophomore, right? Okay, so one more, since I'm on the topic of user interfaces. So sometimes, let me go to the main form. Hey, sometimes we create radio buttons and checkboxes so that somebody can make one selection out of a group or many selections, right? So very quickly, if you are putting radio buttons, okay, so suppose you wanted to find out, ask the user to select a color as an example, right? So if I go to the radio button, okay, so now let me just copy it and paste it a couple of times. Okay, so suppose I wanted, remember radio buttons give you a mutually exclusive selection, meaning you can only select one out of the three, right? So how do we make them all tied to each other? So first let's pretend we wanted to select color, right? So let me call the first one red, let's say red. Okay, and a text property of red. Okay, for the second button, suppose I wanted red, blue. Okay, and a text property of blue. For the third button, red, green. Okay. And green. Okay, so the idea was these three will act as mutually exclusive set. So you can only select one of them, right? So if I run this, okay, if I click here, you can see I'm able to select one, right? Okay, now suppose I wanted another mutually exclusive set separate from this one. So if I right click and copy and paste it over here and paste one more. Okay, and suppose here we wanted the user to select, for example, let's say red. So for example, in a restaurant, would you like your food to be spicy or less spicy? So red, let's say less, and suppose I give it a text property of less, okay? And suppose the next one is red, more, and text.
Same one,
Oh, it's the same one? Alright, let me call this more and I will change the left one to less. Okay, and let me go change this to red less. Right? Okay, so now if I run it, okay, if I make, so the idea is somebody should be able to select one of these two and one of these three. Okay, so if I click, it seems to be working, but take a look, as soon as I click on more, the other goes away. So all five are acting as a group, right? So how do we make them so that we can make these three are one group, only one can be selected out of that group, right? So the way to do that in C# is, as in Windows applications is, one of the controls we have available is called a group box, okay? So if I go over here, there's a group box, okay? So the purpose of group box is basically to act as a container so that we can put other controls inside it. So if I create a group box, right? Okay, and now if I drag and drop, okay, drag and drop the green, the blue, and red, right? So now I can give this group box, some like select color, so that also makes the user interface a little bit neater, right? Same way I can create another group box. If I go to the toolbox and create one more group box and drag and drop the other two radio buttons in it. Okay. So let me suppose I call this spice level. Okay. So anyway, so now these two will act as one group and these will act as one group, right? So if I run it and take a look over here, if I selected blue, if I selected less over here, more, so this is acting as one separate group, this is acting as one separate mutually exclusive group, right? Okay. Another benefit of the group boxes is you can hide things collectively. So if for some reason you wanted to hide all these three things over here. So if I go to the toolbox, double click on a button, okay, so let's say, suppose I say btn hide. Okay, and suppose for this color group box, let me give it a name of GRP color, right? And btn hide and hide. Okay, so if I run it, oh, I didn't write any code, so double click on the hide button, so all I have to say is grp color dot visible equal to false. Okay, so this is how, and if you set the visible to true, it will make something invisible visible, right? So it's very easy to, so now if I click over here, you'll see the whole group box disappears, right? So sometimes if you have, so not just for radio buttons, in a group box you can put regular buttons, drop downs, text boxes. So if you wanted to make a section of your UI, either be visible to the user, so suppose if they have not logged in, you don't want to show part of the information, you can always put it in a group box and set the initial visibility to false. After they log in, then you can set it to true. So it helps us control a group of UI elements together, right? In addition to, for the radio buttons, it helps us have them act as a group. And by the way, how do we know if a particular radio button is selected or not? There's a checked property. So, so suppose very quickly, if I, sorry, let me go over here. Let me put one more button over here. Suppose I say btn test. And test. So as if somebody clicks over here, I wanted to know which radio button is checked. Okay. So you can do something like this. Okay, there's a couple of ways of doing it. So we can write for each loop, okay, for each radio button. Let's call it RB in GRP color dot controls. Okay. So I remember we had talked about that for each loop can be used anytime there's a collection involved, right? Okay. So let me give you one small concept over here. Anytime we create a form, the form's job is to store different controls. For example, this form is storing one group box, another group box. the group box further is storing 3 radio buttons inside it, right? So, so the general concept is, as far as UI are concerned, is okay. Each UI element that acts as a container has a controls collection. Okay, control is the base class for all UI elements, such as button, text box, label, radio button. Okay. So, what is a container? Container for controls, for example, form itself is a container. The group box is a container because it can further store more controls in it, right? So if you wanted to write a very compact code, you can always iterate over the controls collection, pick any control, and find out if a particular selection was done to it or not, right? So now with this background, last thing let me show you for today is if I go back to the project, okay, click on the test button. So for each radio button, RB in GRP color, see this is the group box, right? So I'm saying now let's go over all the radio buttons inside our group box, right? And so all you have to do is if RB dot checked equal to true, then say message box dot show RB dot toString was selected. Okay, so a simple code like this will let us know which radio button was selected, right? So let me quickly see if it works. Okay, so suppose I select blue and click on the test button.
You didn't
I
choose
have
the
to
property.
go dot value, I think. Dot, is it the text? Yeah, let me go to that text. So, okay, let me select again. So you can see we are able to determine, right? So to summarize, one of the strengths of C# is in creating user interfaces very quickly, very elegantly. Gradually I'll show you more and more things. So at least you guys know how to create modal forms. Okay, I was planning to cover some more topics today, but didn't get time. So whatever as of now we have covered will be on the test. Okay, so the generics I didn't cover, so they will not be on the test. So anyway, review all the material and make some summary notes and try your best. Okay, and I'll put this on the website. I'll put a small question related to UI as well.